In the last few videos, we've been working on breaking up our code into smaller pieces across several different plugins. What we're going to run into very quickly is the problem where certain plugins require others, and WordPress doesn't really give you a great way to manage those plugin dependencies. One good way you can manage them is to use the excellent and appropriately named Plugin Dependencies plugin. So inside the comments where you're already defining your plugin's name and your plugin's description, etc., you can add a new key called depends and a list of the plugin names that you want to depend on. Let me show you this in action. I've already installed and activated the Plugin Dependencies plugin. And now inside of our Bootstrap plugin, I'm going to add the file header that the Dependencies plugin is going to look for. It's called depends. And like I said, we'll just give app classes, the name of our class plugin, as the plugin that this one depends on. And as you can see here in the UI, they're deactivated, but they now have a little bit of extra UI applied. Our app Bootstrap plugin doesn't have an activate link because you actually cannot activate it because a plugin it depends on is still inactive. It gives you a list and a red dot here to tell you this plugin's not activated, you have to activate it first. Once I activate the app classes plugin, the dot next to our dependency turns green and the activate link becomes active. Once the plugins are both active, if I deactivate the app classes plugin, app Bootstrap is automatically deactivated as well, and a message at the top of the page lets me know exactly what happened. The last thing this plugin lets you do is get a little more powerful with your dependencies. Instead of depending on a specific plugin, I can depend on a general dependency name, something like, in this case, maybe just classes. Then in my app classes plugin, I can add to the file header a key called provides. And now I'm saying that this plugin provides the dependency of classes. If you know anything about interfaces, this is a very, very low-grade implementation of the idea of interfaces. This plugin is saying, I provide the classes interface, and Bootstrap is saying, I require a plugin that satisfies the classes interface. For our purposes, we don't even want the Bootstrap plugin or the classes plugin to show up in the UI. Once I turn this application over to someone who's going to be managing content day to day, they don't need to know anything about what's going on in the application, and I'd prefer to not have them even worry about it. WordPress actually does give you a way to manage this, with something called must-use plugins. Must-use plugins are plugins that cannot be activated or deactivated from the WordPress admin. They are files that go in a special folder, which I've just created called MU plugins, that WordPress will look for in the same directory as your plugins and themes. Once the folder exists, any plugin files that you drop in that folder will be automatically executed without any kind of activation or deactivation. And there is one strange caveat with MU plugins. In the plugins folder, you can have folders where you have plugin files inside of them so that you can organize them well. For some reason, MU plugins will only read files that are in the root of the MU plugins folder. So for that reason, I've created two files already. One is called bootstrap.php, and that's where we'll move our Bootstrap plugin. The other is called autoloader.php, and that's where we're going to move the init file in our classes plugin. We'll have to reconfigure the autoloader slightly, but everything will work fine once we do. First, let's move the Bootstrap plugin. We'll grab this code and move it into bootstrap.php. We can go ahead and get rid of the app Bootstrap plugin. For our app classes init file, we'll do the same thing. And we've dropped that into our autoloader.php file. As you can probably guess, this isn't going to work right away because the path is no longer correct. We'll now need to go one level up from where we are, and then into what we're going to call a classes directory. So now we can move our app classes folder out into the content directory, and we'll call it classes. And inside there, we'll go ahead and delete the old init file. Now our autoloader will look in the classes directory and still follow the namespace directories as it used to. If we wanted to get really fancy, we could set up our autoloader to find classes inside of plugin directories. All we have to do is assume that the top level namespace, instead of WP plugins, is the name of the plugin. First, we'll do some reordering, and then we'll move the file exists check outside of this if statement so that in case it's not WP plugins we'll still be able to check for the existence of the file. Next, we'll add an else statement here, and we'll put the first item back that we shifted off before. Now, we'll assume our path is the WP plugins directory. For example, if we look in our some plugin folder, first thing to notice here is that we had to rename this from some-plugin to just some plugin. The reason for that is because a namespace cannot have a dash in it, and our folder names now have to reflect the namespaces. But inside here, if we look, we've made a class called someClass. We've given it a namespace, somePlugin, which matches the directory name of the plugin itself. And then the class is just called someClass. If we wanted to call that class in and create an object from it using auto-loading, you can see that here. SomeObject equals new, somePlugin, someClass. Because it didn't start with WP plugins, our autoloader will look in the plugins directory, look for a folder called somePlugin, and then a class called someClass. This will not be incredibly flexible for other people's plugins, but if you wanted to set it up so that your own plugins can rely on the autoloading that you've set up, it's a great way to do that. Managing dependencies between plugins in WordPress isn't perfect. With a little bit of planning, you can come up with a system that works for you. Next up, we'll begin to look at how to move beyond plugins and incorporate third-party libraries into the application using Composer.